Hi, welcome to my review of Austerlitz 1805 from Trafalgar Editions. This is a Napoleonics war game. If we look at the back of the box, gameplay is 1 hour to 3 hours. Yes, I would agree with that. It is possible to play the game solitaire, and there's some stuff in the rules for how to do that. So if we have a quick look at the rulebook, the rulebook's full colour. It's a nice paper stock. This is the second game in the sequence of Napoleonics game, the other game being Waterloo. I would say the rulebook, this is generally a better laid out rulebook, I think, than Waterloo was. And the Waterloo rulebook was good, so which is great. It's nice and spacious, it reads well. It is a translation. But a very good translation, I would say. I didn't really find too many components that didn't make any sense. The rules go through musket fire, artillery fire, the effects on combat, how close combat works, combat, so terrain modifiers, for example. Generally, yeah, very well written. Not a huge number of pages of rules, so 15 pages of the rules, and that includes advanced rules. Then you've got rules for playing the game solo. I would describe it as it's not a solitaire specific game. It is a game that is 2 players that has the solo gameplay rules and guides, I would say, that make it suitable for playing solitaire, and I've played it 2-player and solitaire, and these were quite useful, quite interesting. You're still playing the game two-handed somewhat, which I enjoy very much. So yeah, full rules on that, which is good. It's a good addition. And then you get a great example of a game turn. This is super useful because this game, which I'll come to when I show you the board, is quite different as Waterloo was compared to other Napoleonics war games. And because it's, as you can see from this example here, there's no hexes in this game. There's no zones of control, or anything like that. It plays very much like a miniatures war game, and so therefore for some people who are used to playing hex and chit or hex and counter type games, it's very, very different. I do play a lot of Napoleonics miniature war games. I've got a huge armies for that historic period. Literally thousands of figures, which I enjoy very much. And this is very, very similar in many ways. So I'm quite used to that. It's different in that you're not using a tape measure, and you haven't got painted figures. Instead, you've got counters to represent the units and formations and so forth. But this is great because it does talk you through how movement works, how combat works, etc. So yeah, great job on the rulebook, and then a very useful sequence of play at the end. So next up, let's have a look at the map. So this is the map here. You've got your turns at the bottom. I'm just going to pan up slowly. This is a game in progress that I've set up for this video. It's based off one of the scenarios, scenario 3. So you can see the map in its entirety. There we go. Let's just settle back down on there. So as I described, the map has no hexes. It has no areas. It is a free-form map, and you will be playing on this environment. The map is nice and thick, sort of mounted map. It's actually 2 pieces. So it's just 2 maps. Some of the scenarios, I can think of one straight away that only uses half the map, and this scenario that I'm playing here, even though it's set up on both maps, it's actually only using a section of the map as well. But the quality of the map's excellent. The artwork is absolutely lovely. I love it, and it's because it's clean, because it doesn't have those hexes and so forth. It's a very clean experience visually. and also I would say the map has good readability, so it's very clear the rivers, streams, and the different features of the terrain of the map, which is it looks great. It's sort of very inviting to play on. Next up, let's have a look at some of the counters. The counters are interesting, and again, very different than most Napoleonic War games, in that the counter, let's use this one here as an example, this counter here is the in line formation, and when you flip it over, it's in column formation, and you orientate the counter accordingly. So it's not like most games where you're flipping over the counters over to show step losses or anything like that. It's in fact to show the formation that the counter is in at that point. This is especially important for Napoleonics games because you have this great gameplay mechanics around being in column, being in line, being in squares, and so forth. And that's a really important component of the game, as indeed it was of this historic period. So I very much enjoy that. This game, the counters are a card, and they're very nice. They punch out really well. In the Waterloo game that I reviewed, they're blocks, they're wooden blocks that I went to the effort to paint in colours according to the nations that are represented. But this version, they are normal counters. I think you can upgrade and have the wooden blocks if you prefer. I like both. I really enjoy wooden block games just for their visual and tactile feel. These work just as well. You do put smaller counters on some of the counters to show when they've had their morale damaged, and they do fit on these a bit better than they did in the wooden ones. I'll give you that. And also, you don't have to stick the many block counters from Waterloo like. With this one, you just punch them out and they punch out really well. As you can see, I've got my tweezers. You will need the tweezers quite a lot in this game. Some of the counters are quite small, so this is an artillery counter here, and it is quite small. And also, when the counters are close together, I've found it a lot easier to play with a set of tweezers, and that's really that's quite a key thing. Another component that's important to this game is that this historic battle took place, certainly at the beginning, in very poor conditions, so fog. And to represent that, the game has a unique, pretty cool idea where you have a separate map, like this one here, and you move counters on here to represent the units, and you place those counters on the board. So you've got like a fog of war. You don't know when you're playing the game what the contents of those counters are of your opponent, and it works really, really well. It's especially important obviously for the two-player game. You do lose, I would say you lose a little bit of that in the solitaire, playing the game on your own, but it's not a really, for me it wasn't a a big problem. I enjoyed that, but it works really well, especially playing two-player. So you would let's show a quick example. So this French counter here has number 1 that represents that. So you put the units that are in this, and then you put the number 1 counter actually on the, I'll call it the main game map. So your opponent doesn't know what the contents of that one is. They know something there, and it can be a decoy. And it's a mechanic that's quite simple, works really well. So don't be put off. Most people who are enthusiasts of this historic period in the Napoleonic Wars, don't be put off by the fact that the battle took place in the fog. It actually works well in this game, I felt. The other thing I want to mention quickly is the combat. It's definitely been streamlined and improved for this game in my opinion, over the Waterloo game. The combat in Waterloo was quite straightforward, but this has just got another set of refinement to it. So we have there's only one table really that you need to worry about. and each counter has a firepower. You cross-reference that. So most counters are sort of fitting into the power of 4 to 6. That gives them a 0 modifier. You roll a d6 on this and you see what that refers to. That obviously can be modified, that modifier. So canister, for example, is particularly effective, so that gives a +1, and so forth. It is a very straightforward combat system, and the player raids are great. So here's, on this one player raid, this is really the only kind of aid, this and the terrain, that I used playing the game. Gives you all your different combat modifiers. So this is a key thing. So as I mentioned earlier, the formations are really important in this game. So you can see if the attacker is in a line formation and they're firing against a column formation, then they'll get a +1, which is, demonstrates that really well, I think. But yeah, this is a great player raid. Like I said, combat is very straightforward. Let's talk a little bit about movement, and part of that is also the combat. So this game is different, as I mentioned before. There's no hexes, there's no zones. You're not moving from one zone to another. Instead, you use these movement pieces to show how far a counter can move. So for example, here we go, this counter here is in a column formation and it can move 2 of these on the map. So you just place 2 like that, and that will show you how far that can move. So to there, for example. So in that respect, this is why I'll refer to, a lot of the people refer it to more like a miniatures game than a traditional hex and counter type war game. Conversely, if that same counter was in, let's use a quick example, this column's in a line formation and it would move to there, whereas if it was in a column formation, it would move to there, for example. Obviously, as you'd expect, horse units will move a lot further. I think they move 4 from memory. So you also use that to measure the range for musketry. So for example, if we had these 2 units here firing against each other, I think the musketry range is one of those. So they would be out of range because it's a little bit further than the measure marker. But if they were much closer, they would be in range for musketry. So you're using these movement counters quite consistently through the game. Also the same, it's also a bit different again, and more of a miniature war game type idea, is around artillery pieces. So let's say, for example, we've got an artillery piece here firing against the French. That would be within canister range. To give you some indication, this is the normal range of artillery. As you can see, it's way bigger. And these types of templates, this type of measuring, is again more consistent with miniature war games than traditional hex and counter war games. It's a series of mechanics that I'm very familiar with, playing a lot of miniature war games. But it obviously sets the game apart from other hex and counter war games. It's a system and a series of mechanics that I enjoy quite a lot, and it does play out very much like a miniatures game. I think a lot of the mechanics are more orientated towards that. So what do I like about the game? I think components are great. The components were good in Waterloo. The rulebook is straightforward to read. You will refer to it a few times the first time you play, and it's mostly because it has a different mechanics than a lot of hex war games. There's no zone of control, for example, and that the way you do the measuring and the range again is very different. What I'll talk about what I like about this game, and it's very similar to what I liked about Waterloo when I reviewed that game. A game I played a lot. Is that you've got a freedom here. You can move your formations easily. And that plays out with a great narrative, I think, for the game. I like using measuring devices. And I think probably the big thing for me is because it plays and feels like a miniatures game, but on a big map. Like I've got 28mm Napoleonics, and I've got some 10mm Napoleonics. I wouldn't have a big enough gaming board to be able to play this whole map. Just wouldn't be able to. So in that respect, I can play what feels like a miniatures Napoleonics game comfortably in a few hours on a big epic scale for this particular battle, and it feels a very compelling and fulfilling experience. For me, that's what this game does really, really well. I don't have to spend a fortune on the armies and paint all the figures, which I quite enjoy, but I understand it's not for everyone. But it's the fact I can play this game in an evening, and you can play a lot of the scenarios in comfortably in a couple of hours. And even the full game, again, it's a long evening for sure, but it can be played in the evening. The mechanics are very straightforward. There wasn't anything too much that when I read the rules and played the game, I kind of stumbled over. For sure, there are a few times you do have to refer back to the rulebook. But mechanically, it's a very straightforward game. Combat straightforward, movement straightforward, morale again very straightforward. So great components. If you want to play a Napoleonics game that's quite different, that feels more like those miniature games, I think this is a great game. And a game you can comfortably play in an evening. If someone asked me, would I recommend this over Waterloo? I think first it depends on your personal preference of the battles. To be honest with you, this has the fog of war, which is a great set of mechanics. I didn't go into too much detail because it's fog of war, right? And that's kind of part of the fun is finding out for yourself. But it works really well. It's hard to it's hard for me to say I choose one game over the other. I personally have a lot of love for the Battle of Waterloo, so I would probably, I've got the honest answer is if you think you're going to enjoy this type of game, get one to try it out. But I think you'll end up getting both because the mechanics wise they're very similar. The setting is different. The game plays out in a different way, but they have both the same advantages, I think. So yeah, pick one which is your favourite piece of history, but I think if you enjoy one game, you will definitely want to get both games. So yeah, great stuff. This is a great game. I've played this quite a few times already. I played the Waterloo game a lot, so yeah, very much enjoying. I'll always be very happy to get this game to the table. And yeah, that's it. Thank you for watching.